Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons. I'm your host, Gary Parker. Today we have episode 355 for December 18th, 2023. And hopefully you guys are all kind of winding down now. The holiday season, the end of the year is coming up, and hopefully you guys are getting ready to take a break from work and all the hubbub and have a chance to chill out and hang out with your friends, family, and loved ones. I know I'm very much looking forward to that myself. So today we've got my annual best of episode. And if you're a longtime listener, these will all be snippets that you have heard because they're all going to be clips from the last year. But I went back and tried to find some of the, it was so hard to pick some interviews. Since I do one every other week, it's basically 26 to choose from. And there were a lot of great interviews this year. I've managed to reach out and find some great people to bring on the show. And I like them all. It was really hard to pick. This is more of a kind of a representative snapshot. And so this is a nice little refresher for some of you that have been with me long enough to have heard all of these. I would like to suggest, however, that if you think that someone else might be interested in the podcast, this would be a great one. Actually, the next few I'm going to be doing would be great ones to share with other people because they're kind of highlights, right? Highlight reels. So I'll just plant that little bug in your brain. But so I got about 6 clips here, and I'm going to basically walk you through each one of these and give a little bit of contextual, introduction and a little bit of segues between each of them. But I picked some kind of samples from interviews I've done this year with Andy Yen and Kashmir Hill and the guys from the Cult of the Dead Cow. Of course, I had to bring in a clip from Cory Doctorow in. I've also picked a couple snippets from Vincent Hendricks and Michael Littman. So let's get to some of the best snippets from Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons 2023. All right, this first clip is from an interview I did on October 16th. It was episode 347 with Andy Yen, who is the CEO and founder of Proton. I've had him on the show multiple times now. He's a great guy. He's been very supportive. He actually did a wonderful blurb for my book. It's actually featured on the back cover of the book. It was so good. And he's been very supportive, and he actually reached out to me when they acquired Simple Login and said, "Hey, you ought to interview the CEO of Simple Login," which I did. That was another great interview. And this little kind of short clip I picked from the interview was Andy talking about how LastPass handled their breach. And honestly, the real issue was not so much how they handled the breach, which wasn't great, but what it revealed about what they were doing behind the scenes, which was even worse. And then he talks a little bit about it's not necessarily a bad thing that you're going to be breached because everyone's going to be breached. It's really a matter of how you respond to that and how you prepare for it. But anyway, I'll let the expert give you his opinion on that.
You know what the LastPass breach was? The LastPass breach was the fact that, they didn't encrypt the, website and the domains.
That was horrible.
They didn't use bcrypt. They used some other, weak hashing algorithm, right? So it wasn't that they got hacked. Everybody's going to get hacked sooner or later, right? It's bound to happen. It is inevitable. It was that their security practices were so poor that they made it really easy to take that data and potentially breach it in the future. And so if you're a LastPass user, your encrypted data store is sitting somewhere on the internet, and it's just a matter of time before someone's able to crack it because they didn't use the right technologies.
So here's a question for you, and this is a tough one, and this is what the people have asked me. Do you stop trusting a company like LastPass? Do you hope that they're going to fix it and move and get better as a result of this? How many strikes do you give a company like
Yeah. So in kind of like a perverse way, I almost sort of prefer a company that's had an incident because if you never had an incident, maybe you're just never aware and never woke up, right?
Right.
Right. So I think the fact that they had an incident does mean that they take it more seriously now. And that might be better than someone that never got hacked, right? But you also need to look at the nature of the hack, right? And, security, where it comes from, ultimately is culture. It's people. It's the way they think, the way they act, the way they behave, what they consider to be acceptable. And if you look at the LastPass situation, what was considered to be acceptable was actually an extremely low bar. And I'm sure they're awake now, but to realign the bar for your entire organization, top to bottom, that's an extremely difficult thing to do and very, very hard to do on a short time frame, right? So I would be still a bit wary, let's say, right? Because I know from personal experience how hard it is to change culture within an organization. But yeah, I think it's wrong to kind of say, oh, if you got hacked, then you're bad, because everybody's going to get hacked sooner or later. It is kind of inevitable. But it's really a question of, where was your bar at, right? And, what the hack can often teach us is sort of the level of, rigor that a company had in the work that they, were doing. And that can be very telling.
Well, I think another example is Zoom, because back in the day when when COVID hit, Zoom went from a nobody to a household name, and they were claiming all this end-to-end encryption, which turned out they didn't have. But then their response to that, I thought, was, good. I mean, they hired a lot of top-notch people, some people that, anybody in the security industry would know their names, to come in and fix things. And I think they actually have made a lot of progress. So, yeah, I think sometimes maybe it takes an incident like that to get you to, shape up.
Yeah. I think it's kind of a wake-up call, right? And it's, so I can give kind of, and this is all the same for, legal processes, right? There are some people out there, in the space competing against Proton who, what they say is, Proton had this, had legal issues and legal court cases where, governments came after Proton user data, et cetera, right? And, we're better because it's never happened to us. And my reaction to that is, that's not the case, right? Because it never happened, no one actually knows what will happen when they come for you, right? You don't even know yourself, right? But Proton, because there's been thousands of cases, there's now a strong legal track record and precedent of how this is handled, right? Conclusively what Proton has or doesn't have, because it's gone through 7,000 cases, right? So it's kind of the same, I think, with, security as well. The notion of being battle tested is actually a real notion. And I think, organizations are frequently under attack. It does make them tougher. I'm not saying that we have the best DDoS protection in the world, but the fact that we've been hit so regularly, so consistently over the past 6 years has made us do some things different that probably other companies that don't get hit, wouldn't do.
All right, this next episode is from Kashmir Hill. This is from an interview I did with her not too long ago, September 18th, episode 342. She had just written a book called Your Face Belongs to Us. She, of course, is a famous New York Times reporter. She's done a lot of great work on privacy, some really amazing articles. If you haven't read them, go to the New York Times and just look up her byline. She's done some really big-time articles. And she was the one that broke the story about Clearview AI back in, I think, January of 2020, I think is when that came out. The company that has been sucking up all of our photos from social media, literally billions of images of faces, obviously not billions of people, some of these are repeats, but and then put all these things into a big database and put an app on it, and basically you could walk around town and take a picture of just about anybody, and if they've got a presence online, this thing would find their face and tell you who they were. It was super creepy, and we're actually reading this book right now in our patron book club. I kind of skimmed it really quickly before the interview. I had a chance to get a pre-release copy of that before I interviewed Kashmir. But now I want to go back and read it much more closely. It's just a fascinating story. It's almost a gripping thriller as you're reading it. And this little snippet that I picked from the interview kind of walks through how she found out about these guys, or this guy really, what this company was doing and the really creepy origins of it, and how they really tried to prevent her from doing her reporting. So I'll let Kashmir tell the story.
Clearview AI, the company, scraped billions of photos from social media sites and the public web without people's consent to build a facial recognition app that is incredibly accurate. I have seen it pull up all kinds of photos for me. When you do a search now, the last time I did it with the CEO, there were 176 photos. It works even when I kind of cover up my mouth and my nose. It's really remarkable. Sometimes it'll bring up photos of me just in the background of someone else's photo. I remember one where I was walking down the street and I actually didn't recognize my face and I wasn't sure it was me, but then the jacket I was wearing is one that I bought at a vintage store in Tokyo that is very singular. And so I was like, wow, that's actually me. And yeah, and so as you mentioned, when they first started, it wasn't just a superpower they were building for the police. They were, your typical startup trying to figure out, how do we sell this? How do we make money? And originally they thought it would be far more lucrative to sell it to private industry. And so they were, trying to sell it to banks, to corporate real estate firms, to hotels. And they just kind of happened into finding police as the right customers. And really their earliest beta users were billionaires. When they were trying to get money to keep the company going, they were going to all these venture capital firms. They went to Peter Thiel, one of the most famous venture capitalists out there, was one of the co-founders of PayPal and invested in Facebook, created the company Palantir. And yeah, these billionaires were kind of just using it in their everyday lives, using it at work conferences so they could remember people's names, showing it off at parties. My favorite anecdote was John Catsimatidis, who has run for mayor in New York unsuccessfully, owns supermarkets here, a whole bunch of other things. He had the app on his phone and he was out at an Italian restaurant called Cipriani's, and his daughter walked in with, a unknown man on her arm. And so he had a waiter take a photo of them. And then he ran the guy's face through Clearview AI, found out who he was, and then sent his daughter a text message about the guy. The company did not want me to write about them. I just want to make that clear. When I was first looking into this company, they really were not interested in talking to a journalist. And they had kind of hidden who was involved in the company. There was very little online. They had an office address on their website that turned out not to exist. When I walked to the building, it just wasn't there. And Hoan Ton Tat, who I eventually discovered was involved in the company, he was actually using a pseudonym on LinkedIn and going by John Good. So and part of the book is about that, like digging in and trying to figure out who the people are behind this. And part of what I found out about their reticence to be known was partly because they built this radical app that I think they knew was going to be very controversial, but also because Hoan Ton Tat had what one of the investors called a little Gawker history. And that was that. So when he first came to the United States, he grew up in Australia, and at 19 years old, he flew across the world and moved to Silicon Valley. And, he was one of those people who was developing, little quizzes on Facebook. And then when the iPhone got big, he was building iPhone games. And at one point, he tried to make kind of a YouTube clone. And in attempting to make it go viral, was essentially collecting people's instant messenger credentials so that he could send messages to all of their friends. And it very quickly started spreading very, very, very fast. And people started freaking out because they were sending messages to their friend telling them to check out this site called Video. And he got labeled a hacker who created a phishing scam, who created a worm. Gawker wrote, Valleywag, it was called at the time, Gawker's tech blog, said that the police were looking for him. So it wasn't the greatest Google footprint for somebody who's trying to go to investors and get money. Or to somebody who's trying to sell, this radical tool to the police.
I thought this was fascinating too. As you were doing this and you finally got a hold of the app and you had somebody scan it, your face, there was oddly no pictures of you, which there should have been plenty, right? If this app was doing its job, there should have been plenty. And yet there were precisely zero. And then at one point, the person you had doing it actually got a call immediately from the company. Talk to me about that story.
Yeah. So when I was first investigating Clearview, I tried to go to this office that doesn't exist. I'm calling and emailing and reaching out to people who appear to have ties to the company. I'm finding them through corporate filings, business filings, saw a couple of investors listed for them, including Peter Thiel. And basically no one would call me back, or they would say, I don't know what you're talking about. I was hitting a lot of dead ends. And so I knew that the company claimed to be selling to police. So I started looking for police officers who had used the app. And I found this detective in Gainesville named Nick Ferrara. He was a financial crimes detective. And he was the first person who would talk to me about Clearview and was so excited to talk about Clearview because he loved the app. And he said it worked like nothing he had used before. Police have had access to facial recognition technology for 2 decades now, but it just didn't work that well. And he said, Clearview is amazing. It works, when somebody's looking away from the camera, they can be wearing glasses, a hat. He said, I had this stack of, financial fraudsters who I'd run through, our state facial recognition system and got nothing. And then once I got Clearview AI, which you got for free because Clearview would give out these free trials to police officers. He said, I started running it through and I just got hit after hit after hit. I'd love to be their spokesperson. And I said, well, I'd really like to see what this is like. Like, can you show me a search or do a search? And he said, yeah, sure. Just send me your photos and I'll do a search of your face and I'll show you what the results are. And so I sent him 3 photos and then he stopped talking to me and would not respond to my emails or phone calls. I talked to another officer in Texas. The same thing happened. And I talked to another officer in Texas and he ran my photo and he said, you don't have any results. And we both thought that was strange. He said, yeah, it's really weird. You should have results. When I Google your name, you have lots of photos online. He said, maybe their servers are down. Then he stopped talking to me. And then I did this with a third police officer who was basically helping us with the investigation. He said, yeah, sure. I'll sign up for the app and I'll tell you what the experience is like. And he ran my photo, got no results, but then he got a phone call a couple of minutes later. And it was somebody who said they were from Clearview AI tech support and that he had run this unusual search. And did he know Kashmir Hill from the New York Times? And they deactivated his account. And then he told me what happened. And I realized, oh my God, this company won't talk to me. And yet they are tracking who I am talking to by seeing who's uploading my photo. And I realized how much power Clearview AI had, that they could see who law enforcement was looking for and they could control whether you're findable or not. They had basically blocked my face from having any results. And that it was chilling for me on a couple of different levels just to realize that they were monitoring me like that. And it was chilling for the police officer. He said, wow, I wouldn't think that a company would have that kind of access. Like, I'm looking for suspects in criminal investigations. I don't think that they should be looking at my searches. And he also started thinking about undercover officers and how difficult a tool like this would make their lives. And yeah. So anyways, it was really striking for me as an investigative journalist to have that kind of experience with a company.
All right. This next clip is one of my favorite interviews from the year. And I had a rare opportunity to talk to 2 of the original members of the Cult of the Dead Cow. And if you've never heard of them, this is a original hacker group from way back in the day, back when hacking really was just getting started. And the whole hacker culture thing, it just fascinates me. Ever since I've started going to DEF CON in particular, I've just found the whole thing just wonderfully interesting. And these 2 guys did not disappoint. I was so happy to get a chance to talk to these guys and interview them. And I actually had a chance to meet them and even party with them out in Las Vegas when we went to DEF CON this year. So anyway, it was hard for me not to just include the whole interview. But there's a couple key questions here that I asked them. And one of them was, what it was like back in the day, and particularly for them as young hackers. Did they keep it from their parents? Did they keep it from their friends? What the environment was like? And then I asked them, what is it that makes you a hacker? What kind of proclivities, what kind of interests, what kind of personality style lends yourself to being a hacker? And then that transitioned into something that they really pioneered, was hacktivism, and using hacking for good, for, social justice. Maybe that's an overloaded term today, but it's, anyway, I just find the whole thing fascinating. Again, it's much better if I just let them tell the story. So let's get to Misha and Luke, or Omega and Deth Veggie from the Cult of the Dead Cow. As you were growing up, how did you tell your parents and or friends about this stuff? What was the kind of the vibe of saying you were a hacker? Was it kind of a closeted thing? Like you had to come out at some point and say, yes, I'm a hacker. And then how do you think the perception of hackers and hacking has changed since you were kids?
Well, for me, it was definitely like a sort of closeted thing. At first, I definitely didn't share that with my parents. I think, they kind of figured stuff. Certainly that something was going on when I'd be up all night on the computer, because that's when nobody would call and knock me offline or what have you. But I can't remember how it first, if there was a moment where it was like, Mom, Dad, I'm a hacker or anything like that. But yeah, I don't know. I've never asked them about that, like when they kind of figured it out or what. But that's kind of, I should ask them. But definitely there was a negative stigma attached to it then. I mean, both from socially and just like, oh, you're a nerd kind of a thing, but also there was this idea in the popular press and certainly amongst law enforcement that a hacker was necessarily a criminal, was somebody who is either destroying things or stealing things or breaking things. And for the vast majority of us, yeah, I mean, that was not our goal. And it was essentially the reason that we were breaking into things was twofold. First, because we wanted to learn, and as a 12-year-old kid in rural Massachusetts, nobody's going to give you access to a big and therefore interesting computer system.
Right.
So if you want to get into one, you have to break into it, and that's how you learn about it. But also, we were never trying to break those systems or delete things because then they'd close the door. You wouldn't be able to use it anymore.
Yeah, it's ironic.
You might break things accidentally, but
it's ironic the way hackers and hacking was portrayed in the press back then. Because generally, we, as Luke said, we had a credo, right? That there was such a thing as the hacker ethic. And there's
freedom of information.
There's a very famous text file written about it. But generally, we were there to learn. We were there to explore. We're, doing things in pursuit of knowledge. And it's true that some of that knowledge society considered illicit, but, we were not there to destroy anything. And contrast that with today. We have organized cybercrime. We have ransomware. We have cyber stalking, right? Yeah. So, I'm still having a hard time now being lauded as, or having a hard time with CDC being lauded as white hats by Joe Mann and even AT&T, which is surprising. When we spent decades being dismissed or vilified as black hats and villains, right? So that's also kind of strange. But.
I mean, there was no even concept of white versus black hat. It was just hackers are bad. It's. I think that's changed a lot now, as you kind of alluded to with the idea of life hacks and we're hacking this or this kind of hack, and that's great. I mean, like unreservedly, that's great. I think. And Misha, as you also say, kind of now we have, and you describe them as like, cyber criminals or these or gangs and stuff like that. And like, that's a much more accurate way to describe, these groups is like, it's like, okay, maybe they are doing hacking, but that's, but their identity or, how to identify them is not, they are quote unquote hackers. Like it's, they have a goal in mind, and that is to either is usually to make money. I mean, or to achieve some sort of, whether if they're a nation state actor or something like that.
I've been involved in computer security in one form or another since 1983, but it wasn't until about 1998 when you could actually get employed in computer security, right? And that's due in large part to the public perception of hackers and hacking then. And it's also why only a few people in my family are aware of my involvement in CDC or hacking at all. My parents do not know.
Still,
I never told them. They do not know. Mostly because it would be difficult to change the narrative in their heads, right? If I sat them down and told them this, it would be hard for me to convince them the value of what I was doing, or that what I was doing had some kind of moral or ethical compass to it.
You can't just give them the CDC book?
Maybe.
I mean, it's like, you don't have to believe me, Mom. Take it from Joe Mann.
All right, well, that's a great transition, actually. That's a perfect segue, because, Misha, I want to talk to you about the kind of the moral aspects of this and the origin of the term hacktivism, which, as you said, is something that you guys came up with. I think you in particular. So what does it mean? What does the term hacktivism mean? You wrote a whole declaration about it. So what were some of the core principles there? And then I'm curious if that declaration was written some time ago. If you were to update that today, would you change anything?
So to me, hacktivism is a policy of hacking, phreaking, creating technology to achieve a political or social goal in support of human rights. But it means, I think generally hacktivism means different things to different people. Since we coined it in the 90s, it's really taken on kind of a life of its own. It certainly has I would say, a geopolitical aspect now that it didn't then.
Right.
And even within CDC, we have disagreements about what counts as hacktivism and what doesn't. Some of us believe that denial of service and web defacements can be a permissible kind of civil disobedience. Others in CDC don't. So, I can only tell you what I think hacktivism is. Luke, you probably have some thoughts on this as well.
I think, as Misha sort of alluded to, there are different, it's not like there's a hard and fast encompassing definition, I would say. So the sort of the hacktivism declaration was an attempt by CDC to put something out there that would kind of flesh out this sort of idea and what the concept was. But even then and ongoing, there are disagreements within the herd as to, what is acceptable behavior and what is not. For personally, I think that, I view the idea of a denial of service being of a company's website or to achieve an activist goal being no different than, say, chaining yourselves to the doors or chaining the doors shut or something like that. I mean, I view it as a direct sort of corollary, however, or analogy rather, but other people did not necessarily agree with that. And so it's, we're not a hive mind, we're a herd.
Well, like activism in general. I mean, define it, right? It's hard to do.
Yeah. So in 1999, we created an offshoot that we called Hacktivismo. And so this was a group that included not just hackers, but also lawyers and activists. And Oxblood Ruffin, who's a CDC member in particular, was kind of leading this effort, especially to develop tools designed to help dissidents in repressive regimes avoid censorship and surveillance. CDC is very much, has always been about the free flow of information. I mean, at heart, we are publishers. We've been publishing things since 1984, so the free flow of information is something very near and dear to all of us. So Hacktivismo rather, came out with a bunch of different software. They created Peekabooty, which allowed people to bypass some national firewalls back then. So
sort of a predecessor to Tor. Some of the same people
exactly.
who started Tor came out of the Hacktivismo movement.
Camera Shy was a steganographic application that allowed people to hide, content within other content. Hacktivismo created like one of the first secure instant messaging clients called ScatterChat. So, Hacktivismo was I think was very successful. And drew together a group of people who weren't just hackers.
I think. But I just wanted to add it ties into something else because one of the things you mentioned is including lawyers, and one of the people that was involved with Hacktivismo was Patrick Ball, who's a human rights. I think he's a lawyer, but he's certainly a human rights activist. But and we hosted him. We actually did a human rights panel, hackers and human rights at DEF CON, and I think 2000 or maybe 2001. But the interesting thing is Patrick Ball he's a real human rights lawyer, and so he was actually called as a witness when Slobodan Milosevic, the Serbian dictator, was on trial at The Hague. Patrick Ball was called to testify, and Slobodan Milosevic is representing himself. And in court, he stands up, he's like, so Mr. Ball, tell me more about this dead cow cult that you are part of. and I remember us seeing that and be like, okay, that's really freaking weird.
There's video of that too, right?
There is video, and it was all recorded, but it was this sort of freaky, okay, this club that we're in effectively has entered into the real world in a way that we did not foresee. There's one thing, it's other people in computers know about us and stuff, not in our name is in the mouth of a genocidal dictator.
Right.
Yeah, you've arrived as a hacktivist group when you're name checked in a war crimes tribunal.
Yeah.
But so going back to Hacktivismo, so they released a bunch of really good software, and in at least one case they influenced Tor probably. But I think Hacktivismo was kind of also the way that Oxblood and other members of CDC tried to put some guardrails around hacktivism to kind of define it, and that was around the time that CDC proclaimed that, to us, hacktivism includes support for the UN Declaration on Human Rights. So, in that declaration, the United Nations says that, access to information, access to speech, access to privacy, these are all guaranteed human rights, right? And so this, ties really well with CDC being an organization that believes in the free flow of information, right? So, Hacktivismo was able to, I think refine kind of the definition of hacktivism, at least to us, right? And so that's why I say that, it's a policy of hacking or creating technology that achieves a political or social goal, but in support of human rights, right? Access to information being one of those.
Yeah, I mean, I read the declaration, and I thought it was interesting that it called out those specific, national kind of human rights. No, not treaties is the wrong word, but
it's almost a treaty. It has not been ratified by many countries. I think there are a few that have ratified it. As far as I know, the United States has not ratified it.
Agreements. I mean,
agreements.
Yeah, that's probably, okay. Thank you. That's probably a good word for it. But it really called that out, and in contrast, you guys have definitely also called out other groups that have like actually taking part in cyber warfare.
Yeah,
Talk a little bit about some of that.
Yeah. So, I to me, one of the most consequential things that we've ever done as a hacktivist group is that we intervened to prevent a cyber war. So in 1998, a hacktivist group called Legions of the Underground, LOU, declared war against cyber war against Iraq and China, and planned on disabling internet access to those countries in retaliation for human rights abuses there. That was their reason. We opposed this for numerous reasons. In the hacktivism that we practice, as I said, we support the UN's Universal Declaration on Human Rights, which says you have access to information, and to quote Reed Fleming from Cult of Dead Cow, he said, one cannot legitimately hope to improve a nation's free access to information by working to disable its data networks, right? So CDC assembled an international coalition of hacker groups and publications like 2600 Magazine, Chaos Computer Club, HISPA Hack, Loft, and others. And we issued a joint statement to explain why we thought this was dangerous and wrong-headed, and made it clear that if LOU went through with their plan, they would be pariahs. And it worked. LOU kind of called off their action. They didn't attack Iraq or China. And then, so fast forward to 2012, Luke, Reed Fleming, and I are on a panel at one of the premieres of Brian Knappenberger's documentary, We Are Legion, which is about hacktivism and specifically about Anonymous, mostly about Anonymous. So after the panel was over, a member of LOU came up to us who was in the audience, coincidentally in the audience, and he thanked us. He said, "You saved my life." Wow. He said, I'm married, I have a family, I have a job now. There was disagreement within LOU about whether we should do this or not. At the time, the go ahead and do it argument was winning. When you guys put out that joint statement, it helped some of us win the argument within LOU. And, he said specifically to us, if we had done that, I think I would be in prison. I wouldn't have the life that I have now. And so that was just an amazing experience to have that kind of feedback, to sort of see about, what was going on up behind the other side of the screen, and for somebody to come up and tell us about this impact that we had made on. And
it must have been really validating, right? I mean, for the positions you guys had taken, and that's fantastic. That's a really cool story. Wow. Okay, so we're running out of time, but I had so many other questions we didn't even get a chance to get to. But before we get out of here, I wanted to lighten things up a little bit and ask. My theory is that there are people listening to this right now who have latent hacker tendencies that don't know it. And so what I'd be curious to know before we quit is, what are some hacker tendencies that we might have that you think, some tendencies we might have that might mean we're hackers? Like I was actually thinking in Jeff Foxworthy, I was saying, like, you might be a redneck if, like, you might be a hacker if, that you might not think about. But I think there are people out there that might have some of these proclivities. So, like, for instance, myself, looking back, I didn't really grok this as a kid, but I used to take all my electronics toys apart and I put them back together in different ways and find new ways to make them work. and do other things. And to me, that was hacking. That was the curiosity, the tinkerer in me that first led me to electrical engineering as a degree, and then onto software. And yet I still missed the true hacker boat that you guys were in. But so looking back at yourselves, maybe, and some of your own experiences, and then obviously the people that you've rubbed elbows with over the years, what were some personality traits or things that might lead you to believe that you might be interested in this as something you want to do? Almost every hacker that I've come across has had at least a passing organic interest in lockpicking. Yeah, right. That is an amazing. All the hacker cons have lockpick villages. Yeah. And I think even more interesting that so now you can go to DEF CON, right? And there's a lockpicking village, and you can get exposed to it there. But before, say, DEF CON, it was interesting to me to realize that in isolation, people that I was meeting who were hackers were also interested in lockpicking, had also managed to get a lockpick set because it's difficult in some states. In fact, in some states, it's illegal to have a lockpicking set. And it was just, and this is sort of an organic interest in, it's literally, you have a door in front of you that's locked that you want to get through, right? Which is sort of an analogy for hacking, right? There's some kind of challenge in front of you, and you have to figure out how to unlock that, right? And so lockpicking is something that I have seen a lot of people occupied with. Social engineering is another one. So there are some people who are really, really gifted in social engineering and being able to sort of win your confidence over the telephone or even in person, right? And sort of get you to do something or get you to believe something that you otherwise wouldn't. That to me, that's a kind of like relationship hacking or personality hacking.
I always say that for me, at its like highest level, at or at its lowest level, the most basic level, hackers are people who take a system and manipulate it somehow to do things that it was not intended to do. And so that could be a computer system, it could be a locked door, it could be somebody that you're calling on the phone to try to get them to do something. It could be a political system. It could be a human system, a technological system, what have you. So for me, yes, we are computer hackers, but not all hackers are computer hackers. And also it's a mindset that is not, it's not even a modern one, I would say. The example I always use is that I think of like Benjamin Franklin was a hacker. Nikola Tesla was a hacker. People who basically looked at the world around them and they're like, okay, what makes this tick? How can I make it do different things, etc. And that's at the most fundamental level, that's how I see it. I think that, talking about things that may indicate that that you're one of those people. Misha talked about social engineering and also lockpicking, and you had spoken about like taking things apart. I have a friend who always described hackers as people who take things apart and put them back together better. But more fundamentally, I think it's that kind of curiosity of like, how do things work? Why do they work? And then trying to apply that to the world that they interact with.
Can this work differently? That's another one.
Yeah.
I think the hacker mindset, you ask questions, whereas that other people take for granted.
Yeah.
And
right.
And if you bothered to ask some of these questions, you would stumble onto things, right? But I think in even speaking for myself, I often have a failure of imagination about things, right? And then that other people don't. They ask questions about some field that I don't know as well about, and they're able to make more progress because they don't take things for granted that I'm taking for granted.
Yeah. I mean, hackers are at a basic level, they are driven by curiosity.
Right. And so I think they ask questions, they ask why a lot more than other people do. And I think that I think that hackers question authority too, and not resist authority necessarily, though it may look that way. I think a lot of people associate hackers with anarchists and anarchy, and I think there certainly is a thread there that you guys could talk to. But I think a lot of it's just questioning authority. It's like, what do you mean I can't do that? Why can't I do that? No, why?
Yeah, and I think it's probably was. I mean, I'm sure it was extremely frustrating for our parents in a lot of cases, but this sort of like very much I have to understand why you want me to do something or want me to not do something.
Exactly.
Not, just because I say so is not good enough.
Yes.
And as I say, frustrating for parents, but that's the way it is.
All right. Next up, I've got a clip from my interview with Cory Doctorow. This was episode 348 back on October 30th. So again, not that long ago, but it was really just an amazing interview. I hope you caught it, the whole thing, when it happened. If not, you need to go back and listen to it because it was just really super entertaining, as only Cory Doctorow can be. So he has this treatise about what he calls enshitification. And so apologies again about some of the cursing that might be in this segment, but how the internet went bad, how we lost the promise of what it was supposed to be. And I'm not going to say anything more about it. Let's just let Cory explain what he means by enshitification.
So the thing we need to understand is that while the internet was born with a promise of disintermediation, where we take away all those middlemen that sit between producers and consumers, or audiences and performers, or just friends or communities, and sit between them and mediate between them and control them. And while we did disintermediate a lot of those old intermediaries, we re-intermediated everything. That the dominant form of the internet is the platform, and a platform is just a fancy word for an intermediary. Because what a platform does is it sits between end users and business customers. With Uber, that's drivers and riders. With Amazon, it's sellers and buyers. With Google, it's searchers and publishers. And with Facebook, it's users and advertisers as well as publishers. And when platforms are exist in a condition where they are neither regulated nor have any meaningful competition, they decay. And that decay follows a 3-stage process I've called enshitification. And in the first stage of the process, the platform has some surplus. This is what economists, the jargon economists use to describe like goodies, like things that the platform can give away without failing. So in many cases, that's just the investor's capital. So like you think about Amazon selling stuff below cost when it started, or, Uber lit $31 billion on fire over 13 years, mostly Saudi royal money, losing 41 cents on every dollar it made on every cab ride. And so, an example I like to use in this case is Facebook. So Facebook's surplus when it began was that it had investor capital and it didn't have to do anything that its audience didn't like in order to make money from them. It could just give them everything they wanted. And in Facebook's case, they went to these MySpace users, which was like everyone using social media. Right. And they said, we know you love MySpace, but did you realize that it's owned by a senescent, crapulent, evil Australian billionaire named Rupert Murdoch, and that he spies on you with every hour that God sends? Come to Facebook. We will never spy on you. And if you tell us who matters to you in this world, we'll just show you everything that they publish for public consumption. We're just going to give you a wall of posts from the people you love and nothing else, right? And once those users get locked in, the platform is now free to start treating them worse in order to make the business customers better. So every platform has a different way of locking in users. With Amazon, there's a lot of different stuff, but like the big one is pre-selling you a year's shipping in advance.
Right.
People, 90% of Prime users start their shopping on Amazon, and if they find what they're looking for, they stop.
Right.
And so that becomes a kind of lock-in. There's another kind of lock-in that follows on its heels, which is that all the businesses that aren't Amazon fail. And so now you have to shop at Amazon. But, with social media, there's a very special way that people get locked in, which is that we take each other hostage. So if you've ever been to, like, the last time I saw you was at DEF CON. And if you've ever been at a big con with a bunch of friends and, you're sitting around or at 6 o'clock, everyone's getting hungry and you're like, let's go get something to eat. It could take you till 10 o'clock to decide where, right? And when it's like 150 people on the same social media platform, and when each of them is bound not just to their friends, but like their customers or communities that matter to them, maybe they have a rare disease and we would have to convince everyone else who has that disease to leave the platform because they're in a community for that. At that point, it's effectively impossible to leave. You have this incredible collective action problem, another term from economist jargon. And if you leave, you will have to pay a very high switching cost. That's another economist term, and it's pretty self-explanatory. It's everything you have to pay when you switch. So that's the stage 2 arrives once the users are locked in. And again, to think about how it arrived with Facebook, where surplus is withdrawn from users and give to business customers, Facebook went to its advertisers and they said, hey, do you remember when we told these rubes that we weren't going to spy on them? We were totally lying. We are now spying on them from asshole to appetite. And if there's any way you want to target these people, we'll target them for you. And we've got a building full of engineers who are going to prevent ad fraud. So if you buy an ad, someone's going to see it, right? To publishers, they went, hey, do you remember when we told these rubes we were only going to show them the things they asked for? We were lying about that too. Just post snippets of text from your website along with a link, and we will non-consensually ram it down the eyeballs of people who never asked to see it and create a giant monetizable traffic funnel for your website. So it's locking in now these two different groups of business customers by giving them a really good deal. And then it starts to alter the deal. And digital is great for altering deals because digital is so flexible that you can change the deal from moment to moment, second to second. You can change the deal differently for every user based on your prediction about how they'll respond to the new deal. So take Uber again. Uber drivers, they're, the business users of Uber, and they sort themselves into pickers and ants. So a picker is someone who's picky. An ant is someone who takes every ride. And Uber wants the pickers to be ants, right? Because an ant drives around all day, whether or not they've got a fare, not costing Uber a penny, putting wear and tear in their car, using up fuel and not getting any income. And the more ants there are, the easier it is to get a ride. And so the more riders there's going to be, because if you page an Uber and it takes 45 minutes, you're not going to page an Uber next time, right? So they want as many ants as possible. It's a way of subsidizing Uber shareholders. So for those pickers, they get offered more per mile than ants. And once you start to step up how many rides you take and become less selective, the rate per mile starts to go down automatically. But if you go hey, this isn't worth my while anymore, and you become more selective, the rate goes up again. Now, that's not a thing even the most kind of wicked coal boss, in a Tennessee Ernie Ford song could have done. Not because he didn't want to, right? He just didn't have the facilities to make that happen, right? And so the digital deal gets altered from moment to moment. So with advertisers, they, Facebook draws down its anti-fraud. They start to increase the prices. So you're paying more to show ads that are being shown to fewer people. With publishers, they turn the dial on how much of your content you have to put in the post before the post gets suggested to people. So you have to become more and more of a commodity supplier. And in the end stage, the publishers are told you have to put the whole post up, and we can't tell if the link that you add at the bottom is a quote unquote malicious link. So if there's a link back to your website where you monetize your users, we're not going to show it to anyone. And then in the final stage with those publishers, it's even if you put the whole post up and don't link to your website, if you want your subscribers to see, you're going to have to pay to boost it, right? So this is the kind of thing that you can do. I call it the Darth Vader MBA, right? I've altered the deal, pray I don't alter it further.
Right.
And there's so much scope for that kind of conduct in digital. And so over time, they start to extract the surpluses from those business customers too. And the equilibrium they're trying to strike is a world in which there's just enough surplus that the users are locked in, and just enough users that the business customers are locked in, and no extra surplus that isn't clawed back and allocated to shareholders, because that's the idea. The shareholders do all that subsidizing in the beginning to get paid back on the back end. And so they want as much money extracted from it as possible. But that equilibrium of nearly so bad that everyone quits, but not quite so bad that everyone quits, that is a super brittle equilibrium, right? It just takes, in the case of Facebook, a Cambridge Analytica scandal, a live stream mass shooting, an effective competitor like TikTok, a whistleblower like Frances Haugen, and the next thing you know, people go from I hate this, but I can't leave it, to Jesus Christ, why did it take me so long to leave? I'm out of here, right? And when that happens, you get into the final stage. So there's really not just three stages. There's three stages and an end stage. And the end stage of enshittification is what tech bros call pivoting, but it's really panicking. And in the case of Facebook, the panic goes, we're not a social media platform anymore. We are a place where the human race is doomed to live out its days as legless, sexless, low polygon, heavily surveilled cartoon characters in a virtual world we stole from a 25-year-old cyberpunk novel, right? And that's what happens when it just finally goes to shit. And we are living at a key moment right now because all the platforms are rug pulling. right? We are living through the enshitternet, the great enshittening, where everything that we rely on, whether it's like Unity or Reddit or, eBay or even Red Hat, right, is just turning into a pile of shit that's not fit for purpose. And they're all betting that we'll just keep using it because there's nowhere else to go. Like Lily Tomlin used to say in those old SNL sketches, we don't have to care. We're the phone company.
In episode 324, back on May 15th, I talked with a man named Vincent Hendricks, who was one of the authors of a book called The Ministry of Truth. And I was actually sitting on that book for a long time. It took me a long time to get around to interviewing him in this, but I'm so glad I did. And we talked a lot about social media and how it affects society in very meaningful and powerful ways. And in this snippet, the first thing I asked him was, do these algorithms, are they inherently bad? TikTok and Facebook and these ones that are and YouTube, the ones that are constantly showing us, if you like this, you'll like this. In fact, they don't even wait to ask you the question. They just start showing another video or take you to the next thing automatically and try to keep you engaged. And I asked him, if these things are really inherently bad, like are these algorithms trying to show us bad stuff, or if they're showing us what we want to see, is it really just a mirror into ourselves? And they're really just showing us the stuff that we inherently want, which may not be things that are good for us. And then just to kind of continue playing devil's advocate a little bit, I asked him, is this really new? I mean, we've had problems with things like this, when radio first came out, when television first came out. There's always been this need, as long as there's been advertising, with getting eyeballs, with getting attention, with getting engagement. And a lot of the things that they were showing us to get that engagement, to get us hooked on these things, so to speak, weren't always great for us either. So let's listen to what Vincent had to say about that.
Well, again, I think the argument is the same as before, and it's exactly the same as Tristan Harris's argument. You follow the money again, right? So from that perspective, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, they are biased as to engagement. Even a lot of the counters are set up that way, right? So, for instance, also during the Facebook files, Frances Haugen showed that there was an internal score system, and we also have this in the book, that bad content, or bad in the sense that it made us angry, got an internal score of 5, whereas a like got an internal score of 1. So you were basically jacking up the anger in the feed. And why? Because it creates engagement, right? So basically, you're plugging into what's called our activity mobilizing sentiments, which we discuss a lot in the book. And those are basically, if you ask a psychologist about our emotions, they will say, well, they're at least cut across 2 axes. Are the emotions positive? Are they negative? Are they activity mobilizing, or are they activity demobilizing? And then various emotions will put themselves different places on the scale. So if I write out on the web, I'm so happy today, then of course, although happiness is a positive sentiment, the fact that I'm happy does not in any way animate you to do anything. So it might be positive, but it's not activity mobilizing. Whereas if you proliferate anger, whenever I get angry, I want to do something. What do I do online? I share, I click, I like, I create engagement, right? So there is something to be said about feeding into our activity mobilizing sentiments. Why? Because they create engagement. And we have a lot of negative activity mobilizing sentiments. Anger is one. Indignation is another one, et cetera, et cetera. Fear works really well. And so if you can feed into those, then you got yourself a gameplay. And of course, insofar as some of the algorithms can detect that, at least there is a financial incentive to do so and proliferate the information. That's answer number 1. Answer number 2 is this. Namely, we saw, and of course, TikTok has been in the focal eye for a lot of people lately. And one of the things that we saw that Tristan Harris also has been commenting on very recently is the fact that there are sort of 2 versions of TikTok. There is what he's called the opium version of TikTok. That's the one that's being fed to the Western world. And then there is the Chinese version of TikTok, and the name of that particular platform escapes me at the moment. However, you can only use that for 40 minutes a day. Right. And a lot of the information and material you will find there is educational material. It is not the same thing. So they talk about the spinach version. That's the one that they use in China. And then there's the opium version. That's the one that's being fed to the rest of the world. And why? Well, think of why. Because exactly those French fries are the ones that we like to gobble down very quickly, and it's good for business.
Right. Yeah, I think that is fascinating that of all the social media ones, TikTok has a different version in their native country.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating.
Possibly because they know that might not be the best thing to consume too much of. The same way that Steve Jobs his kids didn't have iPhones, right?
Right. So I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit with you on some of these things. For instance, social media is often cited as causing harms to society in odd ways, that like body image, anxiety in teens, and, generally causing people to feel that their lives are lacking. They see their friends taking these amazing vacations, and they're all these wonderful perks,
Sure.
people portraying lives as being perfect. But this was also said of magazines, right? With airbrushed models on the covers. We were certain that was a problem, and
Yeah.
even to unrealistic portrayals of family life on TV, maybe back in the 50s where it was, fathers knows best and things like that. But even, it goes the other way too. So is this really just a new form of the same thing, or is this fundamentally different somehow?
Okay, so there are 2 points to this. First of all, the same goes for fake news. We wrote a book, the Reality Lost book, a couple of years ago. And of course, you can trace fake news back to as long as we've had a press.
Right.
The concept is not new as such, right? Now, of course, what is different now is the infrastructure, the information infrastructure on one hand and speed on the other. That we have never seen to this extent, right? So that means that it proliferates a lot more than what it has been done before. And then, of course, you have a much better idea of who the target groups are. You have to realize one thing, which is very important, and we realized just way too late. I mean, the entire point is not only to sell ads. Of course, you do that. But what at least as important, and possibly more important, is this: all the data you collect about the users. And that's behavioral data that you collect about how they actually do behave. Now, all that data, everything is being logged. They might not be used, but it's all logged, right? It's all being scraped off the web by the big social platforms. And why? Well, because in the end, all behavioral data is credit information. In the sense of saying, if I can predict the way in which you will behave based on your data or based on your history, etc., then basically I know what you're worth online in terms of your interest, in terms of how often you come back. So all data is credit data about the users. And you can use that for control. That's what you do very upfront in China. So the entire social credit system is based on the idea that you log people's behavior and then you modify people's behavior to the ideas of the system. Yeah, that means the political system. Mm-hmm. And then basically you use it both for control, but also for possibly prediction of what your user are interested in. Now, the prediction part is, of course, intact in liberal democracies, too. It would be very nice to know what the users want before they know it themselves. And, of course, Eric Schmidt, the old boss of Google, said in 2011, he said, I don't think that people really want to search Google. I think people want Google to tell them what they should do next. Mm-hmm. So there you have it, right? And so from that perspective, it's not only ads, it's also the data about the users, which in the end is credit information about you as a user. And there are a million ways from Sunday that you can use that particular information. So basically, to answer your question, I think it's fair to say that we have always had fake news. We have always had problems about self-imaging, etc. But we have not had the infrastructure to this extent, to this speed, with the added bonus of people engaging with that will provide you with credit information about them. That model is new. And that's what we get from Susanna Zubov's book, Surveillance Capitalism, in 2019, namely the idea that as humans, we have always been capitalizing and cannibalizing on something. But in the 21st century, we sort of looked around to see what's left for us to capitalize on. And then we put a mirror up in front of ourselves and go, how about ourselves? That's a good idea. Let's do that. Let's capitalize on our cognitive resource most valuable to us, namely our attention. And the rest is history. And that's 4 years ago.
All right. And the last clip I chose, and again, it was so hard. There were some really great interviews this year. And even just picking the clips within the interviews was difficult. But AI has been such a huge thing over this last year. I had to bring in a clip from Michael Littman, who is from Brown University in the National Science Foundation, who I interviewed. It was a wonderful, wonderful interview. If you want to learn some more about AI and you missed that one, definitely go back and check out that full interview. But I've got a snippet here where I kind of asked him whether or not a lot of the concerns in the media about AI, about taking over jobs or even taking over the planet, were overblown. And if these things are really just tools like anything else, and it might replace some jobs, but then it's going to create new jobs. So I asked him to kind of expound a little bit on that, and here's what he had to say.
Yeah, I think one thing that's really that I have found sort of useful when thinking about this is there's the problems when these models aren't good enough, and these problems where these models are good enough. So as long as they aren't good enough, then people are going to be applying them and they're going to be giving bad answers, and we have to deal with the consequences of that. And I think that's more or less the stage where we are today, that these language models are pretty slick, but I wouldn't trust my life with them, right? Because they do hallucinate, they do kind of make up stuff. They're trained on crufty data in some places. It's one of these things where it's a great first cut at something. Like if you want to just really quickly get, like last night I needed to understand diabetes a little bit better than I do. And I'm like, what the heck is A1C? Like I hear it in commercials, but I don't know what it really is. It was able to kind of give me that first level of like foundation on that. But then when the deeper I tried to push on it, the more it was kind of spouting nonsense. And so it seems to be really good for that. But it's not going to take over the world because it's just not that good. Now, at some point it gets really good, and then it potentially could replace people. But I would not hire one of these models to do almost anything without human supervision because they're just not good enough. And that's where we are today. As they get better, could they be replacing people in various ways? And the answer in principle is definitely yes. One of the things that I worry a lot about in my role at the National Science Foundation is how do we keep these things pointed at good, right? To making sure that they're doing good, and, mass replacing people so that they become out of work and unable to be productive in society. That would be bad. And so we worry a lot about ways that we could be, training people better, getting them up to speed better. If it really is going to shift the job landscape, making sure that people are well trained for the new kinds of jobs that are going to be appearing. This is a topic that comes up an awful lot. But yeah, I don't know. From my perspective, I think it's overblown to say they're going to replace everybody's jobs tomorrow, because they're just not. They're news stories. I've seen some news stories where people say things, we had been hiring all these counselors to kind of talk to people on the phone, but we don't need that anymore. And then and I think it's very much wishful thinking. Like, their budget is being cut. They don't have the money to hire people, and they're crossing their fingers and hoping that one of these chatbots is going to be able to take over. And then they try it and they're like, we're just going to have to make do with fewer people because the chatbots are just not dependable. So that I think is overblown. The notion that that the system is going to rise up and outsmart us and extinct us, I think that's incredibly overblown. I really just don't think this is within the realm of what these systems are capable of. Could they some point in the future be much more powerful and actually challenge us for dominance of the planet? Yeah, maybe, but it's not. I think we need a bunch of breakthroughs to happen before that's the case. This is not anything that keeps me up at night.
My view on this is that I think these are tools like anything else, and in the same way that like a crane or a backhoe maybe replace 10 guys who could dig something with a shovel, there's still a guy driving the backhoe. These things are tools, and now it just needs maybe a more specialized, higher trained person to run that tool. It might replace some of the people do it, but now we've got mechanics that need to fix it, right? Now there are new jobs being created that we didn't have before. The shovel fixer was a simple job. That was probably something you could do. But if you break a backhoe, that requires a mechanic. So I think these are going to be amazing assistants for a lot of the things that we do, and are going to, does that make sense to you? Do you agree?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So you mentioned earlier that I've got a book coming out in October,
yes.
But the focus of that book is basically to try to empower people, like learn enough coding that you can be empowered, so you can get computers to do what you want them to do, because that's what they're for. They're our tool. They're our thing for helping us get work done. And to the extent that they're threatening, that's not what they're for. That is not the point of this technology. But I think to really take advantage of it, we all need to know a little bit more about coding and how that works. Now, in the past, that means you basically have to learn to be a programmer and learn a programming language. What's nice about these machine learning tools is they can help bridge the gap between what the computer is able to do and what the person wants it to do, and just kind of meet us part way. And so that's I think that's as you point out, I think that's the right way to think about this. They're not replacing people because they're not people, right? They don't substitute for that category. They can empower people, and potentially that can cost jobs, right? So if the shovel operator can do the work of probably 20 human diggers, so you don't have to hire those 20 human diggers. So the jobs don't go away, but they do potentially become more concentrated. And so trying to figure that out and really navigate that space it's important from a policy perspective. It's important from an education perspective. And it's important that we all stay educated about what the upcoming shifts look like.
All right, everybody, that is it for this week. I hope you enjoyed a little look back at the best of 2023, or at least some key highlights from 2023. A couple quick things before we go. It's not too late to give the gift of privacy and security, to print off some of those coupons that I made and put them in people's stockings. Give the gift of your time to help people become more private, more secure. To check that out, go to fdsd.me/coupons, and that'll take you to the article. If you want to skip the article, you can just scroll down to the bottom. There's a button there. You can download the coupons. Those are great gifts. And if you would like someone to help you set up a password manager, or set up a VPN, or set up two-factor authentication, or de-Google some of your stuff, if you want some help with that, then you can ask people. You can put this on your wish list and ask people to give you these coupons. Also, if you're still looking for some last-minute gifts, you can review my best and worst gift guide. I would just, you could go back and listen to the podcast episode, but it's probably easier just to go to the article on this. Go to firewallsdon'tstopdragons.com, and it's one of the most recent articles there. It's pretty easy to find. I've got lots of ideas about things you should get, and plenty of stuff about what you shouldn't get if you want to enhance people's cybersecurity and protect their privacy. So next week, I've got kind of a special rerun for you. Actually, it's 2 different episodes, I think, is what I'm going to do. And I decided to go all the way back. I've been doing this almost 7 years now. March will be 7 years. And so next week will be a kind of a throwback episode all the way back to 2017. I picked a couple really interesting interview snippets from that year that hold up and stand the test of time, things that are still very interesting and relevant today. And ones that unless you have been here since the very start of my podcast, which I'm guessing is not terribly likely, you have not already heard. So in that sense, they will be new to you. And I've thrown in some other kind of interesting historical stuff too. So I hope you'll find that fun episode. That'll be next week. And then after that, the week after that, I'll be doing a best of 2023 from the bonus podcast. So unless you are a patron, you have not heard these before. And this is a lot of the extra bonus stuff that I get from my patrons that I keep telling you about every week. Okay, patrons, on Thursday, you're going to get this. This is that stuff. And this is some of the best clips from that. And I got some great bonus content too. So I hope you will enjoy that. All right, everybody, have a very safe and happy and relaxing holiday season. And until next week, as always, stay safe out there and don't get caught with your drawbridge down.